My name is Brielle Maxwell, and today I will be talking about how drugs could possibly prevent depression and PTSD, also called post-traumatic stress disorder. These two diseases are pretty common in today's world, so I figured it would be an interesting topic to discuss. During the video, I will be discussing these issues from another researcher's information. This researcher, who is also a neuroscientist, is named Rebecca Branchman. She talks about depression and post-traumatic stress disorder on a popular show known as TED Talk. Miss Branchman first starts out the show by talking about tuberculosis, also called TB. In the late 1800s, 1 of 7 people died from it. People had very little knowledge of TB back then. People actually thought that if you had TB, you were a creative genius. Think about it. Today, if you had a disease, people would not look at you like you were a genius. They also thought it was a disorder that only poets and intellectuals could get. We now know that this is not true, and we actually do not have to worry about TB anymore. The fact that TB was once the most known disease, and now we don't have to even think about it, goes to show how quickly discoveries are made and how fast technology is developing. Anyways, before we knew the cures to TB, in the 1950s, researchers figured out TB was a highly contagious bacterial disease, and that is when TB was cured. And excuse me if I pronounce the drug name wrong, but ipronizid was the first drug to have a test to cure TB. At first, everyone thought that it was a good solution, but it actually turned out not to be very successful. People thought this because all the patients were happier, more social, and more energetic, but the signs of TB were still showing. And without even knowing it, the first antidepressant was found, ipronizid. The researchers didn't even realize that what they found, because they were so focused on finding one disease, the cure for one disease, that they didn't realize that they found a cure for another disease. Today's psychiatric disease is a huge issue. As many as 1 in 4 people have a psychiatric disorder, and more specifically, depression is the leading disorder. And still, even though it is the leading disease, there are no known cures or what caused it. They do know that it currently lasts a lifetime. So if you have depression, there's no escaping it. The only way you can get out of it currently is by taking a drug to maybe minimize the effects. After time, a second antidepressant was discovered. It's known as imipramine. It too had the side effects of the previous antidepressant. Extreme euphoria, happiness, just feeling great with life. Both antidepressants were discovered from doing research to find a cure to different diseases. It wasn't even realized what else they were discovering, and that is what Dr. Branchman stressed during this whole video. People who were researching a disease were too focused and had their mind too narrow-minded whenever it came to studying diseases. Imagine all other depressions that could have been found if there were broader mindsets used. If people had a more open mind, there could be millions of more drugs figured out to help diseases that exist today. What led to the discovery of safer drugs were the side effects of both the ipronizid and the imipramine antidepressants. Their side effects were really extreme. There were side effects such as liver damage, weight gain of more than 50 pounds, and suicide. But what stood out the most was the fact that there was an increased amount of serotonin in the brain, which is a neurotransmitter in the brain. So after seeing that in each of the antidepressants, there was a huge amount of serotonin, they figured that's where they're going to start with developing safer drugs. So the researchers started with drugs called SSRIs, which stands for Selective Serotonin Reuptake Inhibitors. And they're basically just a drug that helps with extreme depression and anxiety disorders. A common SSRI today is known as Prozac. And Prozac is also the very first SSRI that was discovered. And ever since it's been discovered, researchers have just kept working on them. But whenever the Prozacs were discovered, they noticed that it took a very long time for them to kick in, and that time frame was 4 to 6 weeks. So obviously, more work needed to be done. In 2016, there's still no cure to depression and post-traumatic stress disorder. There's just suppressants. And really, suppressants aren't helping the disease go away completely. They're basically like a painkiller versus an antibiotic, and this is the example that the neuroscientist used in her speech. As I'm sure you know, painkillers just help a symptom feel better or go away. They don't actually make the disease disappear. An antibiotic cures the disease. So you can see that the suppressants really aren't taking care of the disease. Since Prozac, a new drug called Calypso was discovered, and Calypso is great. It's probably the best antidepressant that has been discovered so far. It's quick, and it works on another neurotransmitter in the brain called glutamate. So because the researchers were so focused on serotonin for 30 years, they did not see that there was more to discovering this disease like glutamate. So, Dr. Breichman and one of her colleagues studied mice and the effects Calypso had on them at the University of Columbia. They first realized that whenever a mouse was put into a new area, they were curious and were social and were not nervous. So, the two decided to stress the mice out. And once the mice were stressed, they realized that they weren't social, and they didn't explore, and they weren't curious anymore, and they kept to themselves. So they gave each mouse a shot of Calypso, and noticed that a week later, after each injection was given, they began to explore again and be social. The two were very skeptical of the results, but to make sure that their results were correct, they ran many more tests and even ran a PTSD model, a psychological model, made their undergrads run models and others run models, and they all got the same, that when the Calypso was injected into the mice was no longer stressed. As said before, we still do not know what causes depression, but we do know that 80% of the causes are from stress. And not everyone develops a stress disorder. Just because they're stressed does not mean they'll be depressed or anything like that. Everyone has different stress resilience. So overall, Dr. Breichman and her colleagues' discovery was found accidentally, but it was known that Calypso was the first resilience drug that was similar to immune vaccines. They decided to call their discovery a paravaccine. They said it's a paravaccine because it can protect against stress and the development of the disorder. But if you already have the disorder, it can't get rid of it completely. Calypso, as well as any more antidepressants that are discovered, or any drugs in that case that are discovered, will have a long time before they can be used in humans because there is a lot of regulations that have to go through the FDA, and they could take years. Towards the end of the video, Dr. Bateman went on to say that possibly in maybe 50 or even 100 years, we'll look back on PTSD and depression as we do with tuberculosis. And whenever that day comes, it'll be an amazing feeling. Overall, I think the feeling Dr. Bateman wanted everyone to feel was that how many other discoveries can be made if the mind is open to other solutions when experimenting. Also, she wants the viewers to see how much work, time, and revising goes into discoveries of diseases and their cures. The 3 questions I have for Dr. Bateman are there any cases where the previously listed antidepressants do not help at all, or do they help in everyone? Also, will there ever be a way to no longer use the antidepressants and be emotionally stable? And my last question is, are there any chemical-free practices that are known to help depression and post-traumatic stress disorder?